The rancher was helpless in the water, and the Apache woman watched him without taking her eyes off him. The morning air was crisp, carrying the faint scent of wet earth and sagebrush. The rancher, a man in his 40s with weathered skin and calloused hands, had risen early as he often did, long before the sun fully crowned the horizon. Today, he had set out on horseback to check the distant fences of his ranch, stretching across the rolling hills and valleys of the desert. The rains of the previous night had left puddles in the low places, and small streams ran faster than usual, the water glinting in the early sunlight. He had crossed rivers like this countless times, confident in his skills and the strength of his horse. But he did not yet know that today the river would test both him and the animal in ways neither had faced before. He guided his horse along the familiar trail, humming softly under his breath, a tune that had become second nature after years of solitary work. The sound of hooves against soft, damp soil echoed through the quiet valley, mingling with the occasional calls of distant birds. Around him, the world felt alive with color, the golden light of dawn painting the hills in soft shades, the green of the scattered shrubs, and the sparkling reflection of the morning dew. It was a peaceful morning, deceptively so, for danger often hides in calm places. As he approached the river, he slowed his horse, sensing the water had risen higher than usual. The river ran swiftly, the current stronger than he expected. He had seen it after storms before, but it had never appeared so forceful. Still, he trusted his horse, a strong and experienced animal that had carried him safely through many challenges. He nudged the reins gently, coaxing the horse to step into the water, feeling the coolness rush over the hooves. At first, everything seemed manageable. The horse moved carefully, placing each hoof with precision as the water splashed around its legs. The rancher felt a small surge of relief and pride. He had crossed worse rivers. Yet within moments, a loose rock beneath the surface shifted, and the horse stumbled. The sudden movement threw him off balance. He gripped the reins, trying to steady himself, but it was too late. He tumbled into the icy water, the force of the current slamming him against the rocks and pulling him downstream. Panic gripped him instantly. The water was cold, shocking his body, and he flailed to find something solid. His hands struck at the rushing current, grasping only water and the slippery surface of rocks. The river roared in his ears, drowning out his own shouts for help. Fear, raw and immediate, filled him as he realized how helpless he truly was. For the first time in a long while, he could not rely on his strength or experience alone. Nature had taken control, and survival seemed uncertain. The horse, meanwhile, had scrambled to a safer spot, shaking itself and neighing in alarm. Its eyes reflected concern, as if it understood the danger that had befallen its rider. But it could do little. The water was too strong for it to return safely. The rancher struggled to keep his head above the churning waves, every movement exhausting him further. His lungs burned as he fought to inhale, to stay afloat, to resist the pull of the river. His arms were trembling, and a deep sense of dread began to settle in. He knew that if he lost even a little strength, the river would claim him, carrying him away like driftwood. From the opposite bank, hidden among the rocks and sparse trees, a figure watched him. It was an Apache woman, moving quietly and deliberately, her presence almost ghostly in the morning light. She had been gathering herbs nearby when the sound of the river and a sudden splash caught her attention. Her eyes narrowed as she took in the scene. A man struggling against the water, the horse stranded at the edge. She did not rush forward. Instead, she observed him carefully, reading the situation with a keen sense born from years of living close to the land. She knew the river well, and she understood its power. One false step and both rescuer and victim could be lost. The rancher continued to fight, unaware of her presence. He felt the current tug at his legs, dragging him toward deeper water. Rocks scraped his skin, and the cold bit into his body, searing his muscles with shock. He tried to kick toward the shallower edge to grasp the bank, but the water would not release him. Each second felt like an eternity. His mind raced with panic and thoughts of survival. He had faced many challenges in his life, storms, wild animals, harsh winters, but nothing had felt as immediate, as consuming as this moment. He began to think about his family, about the people who depended on him back at the ranch. Would they find him if he did not make it out? Would his horse be left alone, confused and frightened? These thoughts gave him a fleeting moment of clarity and determination. He realized that panic would only make the situation worse. He needed to conserve energy, to work with the current rather than fight it blindly. Slowly, he adjusted his movements, letting the river carry him at a controlled pace, looking for a place where he could grab hold and pull himself to safety. The Apache woman's eyes never left him. She noted every movement, every struggle, every pause as he sought balance. She could see his exhaustion, the way his arms shook, the way his legs battled the water. Her heart, though steady, felt the tension of the moment. She understood the fragility of life in such circumstances, how quickly a misstep could end everything. And yet she also recognized his strength, his determination to survive despite the odds. She remained still, hidden, a silent guardian waiting for the right moment to act. Minutes passed, though it felt much longer to both of them. The rancher's energy waned and the current grew more relentless. He began to panic again, gasping for air, splashing water over his face as he tried to keep afloat. Then, in a sudden twist of luck, or perhaps fate, he spotted a partially submerged log drifting nearby. It was small but sturdy enough to hold him if he could reach it. With effort, he stretched his arms toward it and grabbed on, allowing the water to push him gently toward the bank. He pulled himself along the log, using every ounce of strength he had left. The river was still strong, but with the log as support, he began to make progress. His heart pounded, and his breath came in ragged gasps, but he felt hope return. For the first time since falling in, he sensed that he might survive this ordeal. Every movement was careful, deliberate, calculated. He could not afford a single mistake. On the riverbank, the Apache woman's gaze followed his progress. She allowed a small nod of approval to herself, acknowledging his resilience. She knew, however, that the struggle was not yet over. One wrong move, one slip, and he could still be swept away. She continued to watch silently, weighing her next action, considering how best to help without endangering herself. The rancher in the water had no idea that someone was observing him, and the realization of another human presence would have startled him. For now, he focused solely on surviving, on reaching solid ground, on keeping himself alive. The battle with the river was far from over, but he had found a temporary ally in the form of the log, and that small piece of wood represented a lifeline in the vast, powerful current. As the sun climbed higher, casting warm light on the river and the surrounding landscape, the scene became a tableau of struggle and patience. Two lives intertwined briefly by circumstance, one fighting for survival, the other watching, assessing, understanding. The tension was palpable, yet there was a quiet beauty in the moment, a raw reminder of the power of nature, the resilience of the human spirit, and the careful balance between danger and salvation. And so, the rancher continued his fight against the river, unaware of the eyes that followed him, the quiet presence that might soon tip the balance between peril and safety. Every heartbeat, every movement, every gasp of breath mattered now. The morning, once calm and serene, had transformed into a crucible of endurance and willpower. The river was merciless, but the rancher's determination burned brighter than the currents that sought to claim him. The Apache woman stayed hidden behind a cluster of rocks and sparse trees, her dark eyes fixed on the struggling man in the river. She had lived all her life close to nature, learning to read its moods, its dangers, and its gifts. Today, the river was a dangerous teacher, testing the rancher in ways he could not yet understand. She watched him carefully, noticing every twitch of his fingers, every flail of his arms, and every gasp of breath. She knew the river could not be underestimated. Even the strongest swimmer could be defeated by its force. She had been gathering herbs that morning, selecting plants for their healing properties. The rain had left everything damp, and the sweet smell of wet sage and grass hung in the air. Normally, she would have moved quietly along the riverbank, gathering her supplies in peace. But the sight of the man struggling in the water changed everything. For a moment, she considered rushing in to help immediately, but experience taught her patience. In nature, rushing without thought often led to disaster. The river could claim 2 lives in the blink of an eye. From her vantage point, she could see the rancher had spotted the log floating nearby. It was small, but it offered a glimmer of hope. His hand stretched toward it, fingers brushing the wet wood as he tried to grab it. The river tossed him roughly, and he stumbled, letting go for a brief, terrifying moment. The woman's heart, though steady, skipped a beat. She had seen such struggles before, and she knew how easily a single miscalculation could turn a fight for survival into a tragedy. She noticed the exhaustion on his face, the way his shoulders slumped and his movement slowed. His breath came in sharp, uneven gasps. Yet despite his fatigue, he refused to give up. There was a determination in him, a will to survive, and she admired it silently. The river had been merciless, but he had not yet surrendered. He was human, vulnerable, yet fiercely alive, and that combination demanded respect. The rancher finally managed to grab the log, holding it like a lifeline. He pushed against the current with renewed effort, using it to guide himself toward the riverbank. The water tugged at his legs, but the log offered just enough support to prevent him from being swept away. Each movement required strength, calculation, and patience. One slip could send him back into the deep, swirling water, and the woman's eyes remained locked on him, studying his technique. She began to plan. If she acted too soon, she risked startling him, possibly causing him to panic and lose the fragile advantage he had gained. She needed a careful approach. She shifted slightly behind the rocks, making herself as small and hidden as possible while still maintaining a clear view. Her mind worked quickly, considering the best way to help without putting herself in danger. She had seen others attempt rescues without preparation, only to be swept away themselves. She would not make that mistake. The rancher's muscles trembled as he tried to pull himself closer to the bank. The log was slippery, and his hands were wet and numb from the cold. His mind began to wander to familiar things: the ranch, the fences, the animals that depended on him. He thought about the mornings spent repairing fences and the long nights checking on cattle. He thought about the small joys of life, simple moments that now seemed far away and almost unreachable. But there was no time for reflection now. Survival demanded attention, focus, and action. The Apache woman shifted her weight slightly, testing the ground beneath her feet. She had long, trained legs that allowed her to move quickly and silently when needed. Her hands, calloused from work and travel, were steady and precise. She could act if necessary, but she waited, watching the rancher fight the water with every ounce of his energy. She admired the way he clung to the log, how he calculated each movement, how he did not give in to panic. It reminded her that humans, even in their vulnerability, could display incredible strength. Time passed slowly, marked by the river's relentless push and pull. The rancher inched closer to the bank, moving in small, deliberate strokes. Every push, every reach was a victory. He felt the cold biting into his bones, but the thought of reaching solid ground kept him going. He tried to ignore the fatigue, focusing instead on the small progress he could measure. Step by step, inch by inch, he fought the current, and slowly the bank came closer. Meanwhile, the Apache woman remained vigilant. She noticed small details: the way he held the log, the angle of his arms, the rhythm of his movements. She saw the strain on his face, the way his teeth clenched, the way his eyes scanned for safe footing. She understood the river, but she also understood people, and she knew he could not hold on forever. The tension built between patience and action, and she prepared herself mentally for the moment she would intervene. Finally, the rancher managed to reach a point where he could attempt to pull himself onto a partially submerged rock. He wrapped his arms around the log and braced his legs against the rock, gathering every bit of strength left in his body. The water still pushed against him, but now he had a stable point. Slowly, carefully, he lifted himself onto the rock, then onto the edge of the bank. He collapsed, exhausted, gasping for air, shivering from the cold water. For a moment, he allowed himself a small sigh of relief, unaware that he had been silently watched. The Apache woman finally stepped slightly forward, revealing herself just enough to be noticed. She did not speak at first, allowing the rancher to catch his breath. He looked up, startled to see another person standing nearby, calm and composed, a silent observer of his struggle. His eyes met hers, and for a brief moment he felt a mixture of fear, relief, and curiosity. He realized that without her careful observation and the presence she represented, his struggle could have ended very differently. She did not rush to him, but she moved with a deliberate, controlled pace toward the bank. Her hands remained free, ready to assist if necessary. Her eyes, dark and watchful, studied his every move, ensuring he would not lose his balance again. The rancher slowly tried to stand, testing the solid ground beneath his feet. His legs shook, weak from the cold and the effort, but he managed to regain some stability. The woman's presence gave him a sense of security, though he did not yet fully understand why. He finally took a cautious step toward her, unsure whether to speak or remain silent. His voice, hoarse and trembling, broke the silence of the morning. Thank you," he managed to say, his words simple but sincere. She nodded slightly, acknowledging him without speaking. Her silence was not coldness but a recognition of the gravity of the moment. She understood that words were not always necessary. The river had tested him and he had survived. Now he needed time to recover, and she was willing to give it. The rancher sank to the ground, leaning against a rock, still shivering from the cold water. The Apache woman remained nearby, a careful distance away, watching him recover. She assessed his condition, noting the signs of exhaustion and hypothermia, but also recognizing the resilience that had kept him alive. The sun had climbed higher now, warming the air and drying the ground, and the river, once so menacing, now seemed calmer. Yet, the woman knew better than to underestimate it. The danger had passed for the moment, but it could return at any time. The rancher tried to gather his thoughts, feeling the warmth returning to his body slowly. He thought about what had just happened, about the power of the river, and the quiet presence of the woman who had observed him. He realized that he had been fortunate, more than he often allowed himself to admit. Her presence, her careful patience, had played a role in his survival, and he felt a mixture of gratitude and humility. Survival, he understood, was not just about strength or skill. It was also about timing, understanding, and sometimes the unseen guidance of another person. The Apache woman finally moved a little closer, her steps deliberate and measured. She did not rush him, did not speak unnecessarily, but her presence offered reassurance. She understood that trust was earned slowly, and that the man had faced enough to appreciate the quiet, steady support she represented. The rancher looked up at her, his eyes meeting hers, and in that brief exchange, an unspoken understanding passed between them. They were strangers brought together by circumstance, yet they shared a moment of connection forged in struggle, observation, and the quiet determination to survive. The river continued its steady flow, a reminder of the power and unpredictability of nature. The rancher, now somewhat recovered, sat on the bank, watching the water he had just fought against. The experience had left him humbled, aware of the fragility of life and the importance of careful observation. The Apache woman remained nearby, a silent witness to his resilience, her presence both protective and respectful. The morning had changed them both, marking a moment of survival, patience, and quiet respect that would linger long after the river had returned to its normal rhythm. The rancher had finally gained his footing on the riverbank, his wet clothes clinging to his body and his arms trembling from exhaustion. He leaned against a rock, trying to catch his breath, while the river's current whispered behind him like a constant reminder of the danger he had narrowly escaped. The sun had risen higher now, sending shafts of golden light across the water and warming the damp earth. But the warmth did little to calm the chill that ran through his bones. Every muscle ached, and his lungs still burned from the struggle. The Apache woman remained at a careful distance, her dark eyes never leaving him. She could see the strain etched across his face, the way his jaw clenched, the tightness in his shoulders, the unsteady movements as he tried to regain composure. She understood his fatigue well. In her life, she had often witnessed both humans and animals pushed to their limits, struggling against forces far greater than themselves. And she knew that even when the immediate danger seemed over, the mind and body could remain trapped in a state of tension, ready to falter again if not treated with care. For several moments, neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the river flowing relentlessly and the distant calls of birds greeting the morning. The rancher, shivering and disoriented, scanned the riverbank for something solid to hold on to, something that might help him recover more securely. His eyes fell on a small patch of firm ground just a few feet ahead, partially covered in grass and moss. He began to move toward it slowly, testing each step to make sure the wet rocks would not slip beneath him. The woman observed this carefully. She noticed the subtle adjustments he made, the way he bent his knees slightly with each step, the way his hands reached out instinctively to steady himself. She knew he was learning, adapting, just as she had learned to adapt to the unpredictability of the land over many years. And yet she also knew that fatigue could be cruel. One careless movement, one slip, and the river could still claim him. She decided it was time to act, but she approached with caution. She moved deliberately closer, keeping her movements slow and visible so as not to startle him. Her presence was meant to be reassuring, not threatening. The rancher's head turned slightly as he noticed her shift, his eyes widening in a mixture of surprise and uncertainty. He had been alone in the wilderness for so long, and now, this silent observer, this stranger, stood near him. He felt a surge of nervous energy mixed with relief. "Are you all right?" she finally asked, her voice calm and measured, carrying an authority that came from confidence and experience rather than intimidation. The rancher looked at her, still catching his breath, and nodded weakly. I think so," he replied, his voice rough from shouting and the cold water. "Thank you, I don't know what I would have done if," he trailed off, shaking his head, the words failing him. The woman nodded in acknowledgement but did not rush to comfort him. Instead, she kept a steady gaze, allowing him to process his own survival. There was a rhythm to her patience, an understanding that rushed interventions often did more harm than good. She studied the terrain around them, noting the uneven rocks, the slippery mud, and the small debris that could cause trouble if he tried to move too quickly. Her mind worked quietly, calculating the safest path for him to recover fully. The rancher took a cautious step forward, testing the ground. His legs shook, but he was determined to regain his balance. The woman watched him, noting the tremor in his hands and the slight wobble in his stance. She decided that a gentle guiding hand might be needed, but only after he had proven that he could accept help. Slowly, she extended a hand toward him, keeping her distance but offering support. At first, the rancher hesitated. He was not used to receiving help from strangers, especially in the wilderness, where self-reliance was everything. But his exhaustion and the awareness of the river's continuing force convinced him to accept it. He reached out and took her hand, feeling a firm, steady grip that inspired confidence. Slowly, she helped him shift his weight, guiding him to a more secure patch of ground where he could stand without fear of slipping. As he regained some stability, the rancher finally allowed himself a small smile, though fatigue still lingered in his eyes. I didn't think I'd make it," he admitted quietly, almost to himself. She nodded, not needing to offer words of comfort. The acknowledgement was enough. She understood the weight of his words, the truth behind them, and the lesson in humility they carried. Survival was rarely about strength alone. It was about patience, awareness, and the ability to read one's environment carefully. The rancher leaned against a rock, slowly letting the warmth of the sun seep into his cold body. The woman stayed close, ready to intervene if the river tried to reclaim him again. Her presence was quiet but powerful, a reminder that help could be offered without words, without urgency, without panic. She did not ask for gratitude, she only watched, ensuring that he could recover safely. Minutes passed, the silence filled with the soft rush of the river and the rustling of leaves. The rancher began to notice small details he had overlooked in his struggle, the glint of sunlight on the water, the fresh scent of wet grass, the way birds hopped along the riverbank. Slowly he realized that the world was still beautiful, even in moments of danger, and yet he remained aware of the risk. One false step, one moment of carelessness, and he could be back in the river's grasp. The woman finally spoke again, her voice calm and deliberate. "You need to move slowly. The rocks are slippery. Take your time." The rancher nodded, appreciating her guidance. He realized that his own strength and determination had been important, but so had her careful observation and timing. She had allowed him to make decisions while still providing support, a balance that ensured his survival. He began to move cautiously along the riverbank, testing each step and adjusting his weight as he went. She remained close enough to intervene if necessary, but far enough to allow him space. Her presence was reassuring, and he felt a growing sense of respect for her knowledge and skill. She understood the land in ways he could only begin to imagine, and she had chosen to watch, assess, and guide rather than rush in recklessly. As they moved, the rancher glanced at her. "Why didn't you just jump in and pull me out?" he asked, curiosity mixed with awe in his voice. She shook her head slightly, her expression calm. "The river is dangerous. Acting too quickly can make things worse. You needed to survive on your own first. I only intervened when it was safe." Her answer was simple but carried the weight of experience. He realized that survival was not always about brute force or immediate action. Sometimes, it was about knowing when to act and when to observe. The rancher continued along the bank, feeling his strength slowly return. The river's roar had become less menacing as he moved farther from its edge, but he remained cautious. Each step reminded him of the fragility of life and the importance of awareness. He glanced back at the woman, who followed quietly, her eyes still attentive. He did not fully understand her yet, but he trusted her judgment. In the wilderness, trust was rare, and it was earned through careful observation and measured action. The morning continued to pass, the sun climbing higher, warming the air and drying the damp earth. The rancher's movements became more confident, though still careful. He began to notice small signs of wildlife: a bird hopping near the edge of the river, a rabbit darting through the brush, and he realized that life continued around him, indifferent to his struggle. The woman moved with him, silent and steady, ensuring that he did not falter again. Finally, he reached a section of solid, dry ground where he could stand without fear of slipping. He paused, taking a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sun and the relief of safety. The woman stopped nearby, maintaining a respectful distance. Neither spoke immediately. Words were unnecessary. The shared experience, the struggle, and the quiet guidance had already created a bond between them. The rancher finally broke the silence. I don't know how to thank you," he said, his voice steady now, though still filled with gratitude. She shook her head slightly. "You survived because you didn't give up. That is your own strength. I only helped you find safety." Her words were modest, yet they carried a profound truth. Survival was a partnership between human will and careful guidance, and both had played a role in this morning's events. As they both stood there, looking at the river and the path they had taken, a sense of calm settled over them. The danger had passed, but the lessons remained. The rancher had learned humility, patience, and the value of careful observation. The woman had witnessed resilience, determination, and the human instinct to survive. Together, they had navigated a dangerous moment in the wilderness, each contributing in their own way to the outcome. The rancher glanced at her one last time, feeling a deep sense of respect. "I will remember this," he said quietly. She nodded, her eyes softening just slightly, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. The river flowed behind them, relentless and powerful, a reminder of both danger and life, and the morning air carried a sense of quiet triumph and survival. The rancher now stood on the riverbank, shivering slightly, but his legs steadier than they had been moments before. The sun was higher in the sky, warming his wet clothes and gradually bringing color back to his pale, exhausted face. He tried to calm his breathing, each inhalation still ragged but less desperate than before. Behind him, the river continued to rush with steady determination, the sound of water hitting rocks creating a constant reminder of the near danger he had just faced. He glanced toward the Apache woman, who remained a few feet away, her dark eyes never leaving him. In her stillness, she radiated quiet control, a presence that seemed to tame the chaos of the river. He realized, in a slow, dawning way, that he could not have survived without her observation. She had not simply waited, she had analyzed, calculated, and prepared herself to help at exactly the right moment. Her actions had been deliberate, precise, and rooted in experience. The thought humbled him. He had relied on his strength and skill, yes, but in the end, the woman's careful attention had tipped the balance in his favor. His pride, which often guided his decisions on the ranch, now softened into quiet respect. The woman finally stepped closer, her movements slow, careful, and measured. She did not rush him, but the rancher could feel the strength in her presence, the confidence that came from years of understanding the land and its dangers. She reached into a small bag she had carried and pulled out a piece of cloth. Handing it to him, she gestured for him to wrap his arms around it. He obeyed, grateful for the warmth it offered. The simple act, small as it seemed, reminded him that survival was often about small, steady gestures rather than dramatic heroics. He sat down on a smooth rock, leaning back and allowing himself a moment of rest. The water still roared behind him, but it no longer felt threatening. The danger had passed, and now he could focus on regaining his strength. He took slow, deliberate breaths, letting the sun's warmth seep into his muscles and bones. He felt the tension in his shoulders easing, the trembling in his hands diminishing. It was a gradual process, but with each passing minute, he became more certain that he would walk away from this ordeal. The Apache woman remained nearby, her eyes scanning the river and surrounding land. She was alert, aware that unexpected dangers could still emerge, but she allowed the rancher the space to recover. Her silence was not indifference. It was a conscious decision to provide him autonomy, to let him regain confidence in his own abilities. In her culture, and in her experience, guidance often worked best when paired with patience and respect. She had learned that survival depended not just on strength, but on the ability to act at the right moment. As the rancher regained his composure, he began to notice the small details around him, the patterns in the water, the way the sunlight reflected on the wet rocks, the gentle sway of reeds near the bank. These details, once insignificant, now felt alive with meaning. He realized how narrowly he had escaped disaster, and how every moment of the struggle had required focus and endurance. In a strange way, he felt gratitude not just for his own resilience, but for the presence of another human being who had silently guided him through the ordeal. After several minutes, he finally stood, testing his weight on his legs. His muscles ached, and his clothes were still damp, but he was steady. The Apache woman watched closely, ready to assist if he faltered. He looked at her, noticing for the first time the subtle movements of her hands, the confident set of her shoulders, the calm, unwavering gaze that seemed to read both the land and him. He realized that she had chosen her moment carefully, allowing him to demonstrate his own strength while providing support exactly when it was needed. "Thank you," he said again, his voice stronger this time. "I don't know what I would have done without you." She inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his gratitude but not offering verbal reassurance. Words were not necessary between them. The shared experience, the struggle, the observation, the careful guidance, had already spoken volumes. He felt a sense of connection, a bond forged in adversity and mutual recognition of human vulnerability and resilience. He took a few tentative steps towards solid ground further from the river, testing each movement. The woman followed silently, giving him enough space to regain confidence in his balance and strength. He felt the stiffness in his limbs begin to loosen, and with each step he regained more control over his body. The river, once a force of terror, now seemed almost serene, a reminder of both the danger he had survived and the life-giving power it held. The rancher finally stopped at a safe distance from the water, turning to face the woman. His clothes were still damp, his hair clinging to his forehead, but his eyes held a mixture of relief, awe, and gratitude. You saved me," he said softly. "I don't think I could have made it without you." She remained silent, her expression calm. Her presence alone conveyed understanding and acknowledgement. She had not rushed in recklessly. She had acted with thought and precision, and the result was his survival. He noticed for the first time the details of her appearance, the practicality of her clothing, suitable for travel and work in the wilderness, the strength in her hands, calloused and steady, the confidence in her posture, unshaken by the river's chaos. He felt a mixture of admiration and respect, realizing that she embodied a quiet power, the kind that came from experience and wisdom rather than force. She had observed, assessed, and intervened with perfect timing. He had survived not by luck, but by the combination of his determination and her careful guidance. The rancher sank to the ground again, leaning against a sturdy rock. He needed a moment to rest fully, to let the adrenaline fade, to regain control over his trembling muscles. The Apache woman remained nearby, a careful distance away, her eyes sweeping the landscape and the river. She was alert, ready to act if necessary, but allowing him the space to recover. Her presence was both reassuring and unobtrusive, a delicate balance that made him feel secure without feeling watched. As he rested, he reflected on the morning's events. The river had tested him, pushed him to his limits, and forced him to confront his own vulnerability. He realized that strength alone was not enough. Survival required observation, patience, and sometimes the guidance of another person. He thought about the woman who had silently watched, waiting for the right moment to act. Her actions had been deliberate, calculated, and rooted in experience. He felt a deep sense of gratitude, mixed with awe at her composure and skill. After a few more minutes, the rancher attempted to stand once again. This time he moved with more confidence, feeling his body respond to his commands more reliably. He took careful steps, testing the ground as he went, while the Apache woman followed closely, ready to assist if needed. He realized that the ordeal was not yet over. He still needed to return to the safety of the ranch, to warm clothing, and to a place where he could rest fully. But the immediate danger of the river had passed, and he felt a growing sense of relief. The woman spoke again, her voice calm and steady. "You need to keep moving. The ground is safer a little further from the water." He nodded, appreciating her guidance. He began to walk slowly, deliberately, feeling the sun's warmth on his damp clothing and the solid ground beneath his feet. Each step felt like a victory, a testament to both his endurance and the careful support she provided. He realized that survival was a partnership between human will and measured guidance, and he felt fortunate to have experienced both. As they moved away from the river, the rancher glanced at her, curiosity and gratitude in his eyes. "Why did you help me?" he asked softly. She paused, considering her answer. "Because you were in danger," she said simply, "and because I could help, that is enough." Her words were simple, yet they carried a depth of meaning. She did not seek recognition or reward. Her actions were guided by understanding, skill, and a sense of responsibility. He realized that there was wisdom in her restraint, and that sometimes the most meaningful help was offered quietly, without fanfare. The rancher continued walking slowly, feeling his strength return with each step. The river, once a force of fear, now seemed like a lesson, a reminder of nature's power and the importance of awareness and patience. He looked at the woman beside him, appreciating the calm, steady presence that had guided him through the ordeal. He felt a sense of connection, a silent bond formed in the shared experience of danger and survival. By the time they reached a stretch of dry, solid ground, the rancher was able to move with confidence. The river was behind them, the immediate danger gone, but the lessons of the morning remained vivid in his mind. He turned to the Apache woman, a mixture of gratitude and respect in his eyes. "I will never forget this," he said quietly. She nodded, acknowledging his words without the need for further explanation. The bond formed through struggle and observation was enough, a quiet understanding that did not require speech. The river continued its flow behind them, a reminder of both danger and life, while the rancher felt a sense of calm and relief. He had survived, not by luck alone, but through a combination of his own determination and the careful guidance of another human being. The experience had left him humbled, grateful, and deeply aware of the fragility and resilience of life. The rancher now stood on firm, dry ground, the river behind him flowing peacefully, glinting under the warm sunlight. He felt the weight of exhaustion in his body, every muscle sore, yet there was a growing sense of relief, even quiet triumph. The ordeal of the morning seemed almost unreal now, as if it had been a dream in which danger and life had danced together in sharp contrast. The sun had climbed higher, warming the damp earth, drying his clothes slowly, and bringing a comforting sense of normalcy back to the world around him. He turned his gaze toward the Apache woman who had guided him through the river's fury. She stood nearby, calm, steady, her dark eyes observing him with quiet intensity. There was no rush in her movements, no demand for recognition. Her presence alone had been a silent force that had carried him through the struggle. The rancher felt a deep gratitude that went beyond words, a gratitude for her patience, her wisdom, and the quiet strength that had helped him survive. He realized that his survival had been as much about her careful observation as it had been about his own determination. For several moments they simply stood there in silence. The river murmured behind them, a soft, constant reminder of the morning's danger. Birds called from the trees, and the wind carried the scent of wet grass and sage. In the quiet, the rancher reflected on the fragility of life. One wrong move, one careless step, and he could have been swept away, but he had survived. And in surviving, he had gained more than physical safety. He had gained perspective, humility, and a renewed respect for the forces of nature that shaped his world. He finally spoke, his voice steady but quiet, almost hesitant. I don't know how to thank you. You saved my life." The Apache woman inclined her head slightly, acknowledging his words without speaking. She had no need for thanks. Her actions had been deliberate and purposeful, and she had acted out of understanding rather than expectation. For her, the satisfaction lay in knowing that he had survived, that he had returned safely to solid ground. The rancher realized that her calm composure and deliberate intervention had taught him an important lesson. Sometimes help is most powerful when offered quietly, without demand or ceremony. He sank down onto a nearby rock, letting the warmth of the sun soak into his cold, aching body. He could feel his muscles slowly relaxing, the adrenaline that had carried him through the river fading away. He thought about the journey back to the ranch, the long miles he would need to travel and the work that awaited him. But for the moment, he allowed himself to rest fully, to breathe deeply, and to absorb the quiet victory of survival. The Apache woman remained near him, a steady presence, offering reassurance through proximity rather than words. As he rested, the rancher's mind wandered back to the moments of struggle in the river. He recalled the panic, the cold water, the relentless pull of the current. He remembered the exhaustion that had made each movement feel monumental, and the small victories, grabbing the floating log, reaching the edge of the bank, that had kept him alive. And he thought about the woman who had watched silently, guiding him without rushing in, allowing him to find strength within himself while providing support at precisely the right moment. It was a lesson in patience, observation, and the delicate balance between independence and guidance. The sun continued its climb, casting warm light across the landscape. The rancher finally rose, testing his strength with careful steps. His legs were sore, his body still stiff, but he felt more confident with each movement. The river was behind them, a force of danger that had been conquered. Ahead lay the path back to his life, to the ranch, to the familiar routines he had taken for granted. And yet, the memory of the morning would remain vivid, a reminder that life could be fragile, and that sometimes survival depended on the kindness and wisdom of another person. The Apache woman walked beside him, matching his pace. She did not speak, but her presence was steady, a guide that reassured him without imposing. The rancher glanced at her occasionally, noticing the way her eyes scanned the surroundings, the careful attention she paid to each step, each patch of uneven ground. She had taught him something subtle yet profound, that awareness and patience could be as powerful as strength, and that survival often required more than physical effort. They walked together for some time, moving away from the riverbank and toward safer, drier land. The rancher felt a growing sense of appreciation for her calm and careful guidance. He realized that the quiet moments of observation, the deliberate interventions, and the patience she had shown were all part of a skill set he had only glimpsed but deeply respected. He thought about the many times he had relied solely on his own strength and knowledge, and he understood now that humility and willingness to accept help could be just as vital as courage and skill. At one point, the rancher paused, leaning on a sturdy branch for support. He looked back toward the river, seeing the water flowing steadily, no longer menacing but still powerful and alive. The sight reminded him of the morning's struggle and the lessons it had carried. The river had tested him, demanded his full attention, and forced him to confront his vulnerability. And through it all, he had survived, guided by the careful watchfulness of another person. He felt gratitude, respect, and a quiet sense of awe at the forces of nature and human resilience intertwined in that morning's ordeal. The Apache woman spoke finally, her voice calm but firm. "The river can be unpredictable," she said. "You must always respect it. It is strong and it tests those who underestimate it." The rancher nodded, absorbing her words. They carried more than practical advice. They carried wisdom born of experience and understanding. He realized that this encounter was more than a moment of danger. It was a lesson that would stay with him for the rest of his life. As they continued, the rancher felt a sense of connection to the woman that went beyond words. She had guided him without judgment, acted without expectation, and offered support with precision and patience. He realized that trust and respect could grow in the briefest of encounters, shaped by actions rather than speech. The morning had tested him physically and mentally, but it had also reminded him of the quiet strength that exists in others, waiting for the right moment to offer guidance. Finally, the rancher stopped at the edge of a small clearing, looking out over the landscape. The hills stretched endlessly, dotted with shrubs and trees, the sun casting warm light over the terrain. He took a deep breath, feeling the clean air fill his lungs, appreciating the life that continued around him. The experience of the river, the struggle, and the careful guidance of the Apache woman had left him humbled, yet invigorated. He had faced danger, survived, and learned lessons he would carry with him forever. He turned to the woman, his eyes reflecting gratitude, respect, and a newfound understanding. "I will never forget what you did," he said quietly. She nodded, her expression calm, almost serene. There was no need for further words. The shared experience, the struggle, the careful observation, and the rescue had created a bond that did not require explanation. In that moment, the rancher understood that the most meaningful connections often arise in the briefest, most intense experiences, moments of trust, resilience, and shared humanity. The sun continued to climb higher, casting long shadows over the hills. The rancher felt the warmth on his skin and the strength returning to his body. He realized that he had learned something vital about life and survival, that courage alone was not enough, that humility and willingness to accept guidance could be equally important, and that human connection, even brief, could shape outcomes in profound ways. He looked at the Apache woman one last time, silently thanking her for her patience, her wisdom, and the life-saving presence she had offered without demand or ceremony. As they parted ways, the rancher turned to look at her once more. She gave a slight nod and a small smile, acknowledging the unspoken understanding between them. He felt a sense of closure, yet he knew that the memory of this morning, the struggle, the river, the quiet guidance, would remain with him forever. He carried with him not just the relief of survival, but also the lessons of patience, observation, and human connection. The river had tested him, the woman had guided him, and he had emerged with strength, gratitude, and a deeper understanding of life's fragile beauty. The rancher began the journey back to his ranch, his steps steady and deliberate. He looked back one last time at the river, seeing its currents flowing endlessly, powerful yet beautiful. He thought about the morning's events, the struggle, the fear, the determination, and the quiet guidance that had saved him. He understood that life would continue to present challenges, but he also knew that he had gained knowledge, perspective, and a sense of respect that would guide him through future trials. The Apache woman watched him leave, her presence fading into the landscape. She had fulfilled her role quietly, deliberately, and without expectation. She had ensured his survival, guided him safely, and shared an unspoken lesson about patience, awareness, and respect for life's unpredictable challenges. As the rancher disappeared over the hills, she turned back toward the river, ready to continue her own path, carrying with her the quiet satisfaction of knowing that she had made a difference without seeking recognition. The morning had begun with danger and uncertainty, but it ended with survival, reflection, and a deep sense of connection. Both the rancher and the Apache woman had been changed by the encounter. One had regained strength and life, and the other had witnessed resilience, determination, and the human capacity to endure. The river continued its steady flow, a reminder of both challenge and life, and the memory of that morning would remain in their minds, a testament to courage, patience, and the quiet power of guidance and understanding.